He sold my house without saying a single word, not even a warning, not even a whisper. By the time I found out, strangers were already walking through my living room, admiring the sunlight on floors he once promised would be ours forever. And somewhere inside, tucked behind an old cedar trunk, my wedding dress still waited for a future he had quietly erased. The wind was the first thing I heard that afternoon, a restless, whispering sound that tugged at the loose ends of my coat. The gate stood half open, trembling like it had something to say, and pinned right at the centre, held by a single rusted clip, was a piece of paper that seemed to breathe with the breeze. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. My shift had ended 3 hours ahead of schedule because the power kept flickering at the office, cutting our computers off mid-sentence. I remember thinking how rare it was to walk home with sunlight still warm on my back. The coastal air carried the smell of salt and pine, a familiar comfort I'd always trusted. The house looked calm from a distance, the pale yellow siding, the quiet windows, the small patch of garden I kept promising to fix. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing warned me. I wiped my palms on my skirt before touching the gate. The metal felt colder than it should have been. The paper fluttered again, folding and unfolding like a small, nervous bird. I thought it might be another utility notice, a reminder about the water meter maybe, or a neighbour leaving a message about the stray cat that liked to sleep on our porch. But then I saw the official stamp at the top. Dark, heavy, government ink. My throat tightened in that slow, creeping way that doesn't feel like fear yet, just a quiet alarm somewhere behind the ribs. I unpinned the paper carefully, though my fingers had already begun to tremble. The words didn't make sense at first. They floated transfer, authorization, property. I blinked, trying to stitch them together. The wind lifted the bottom corner, brushing it against my wrist like it wanted to hurry me along. And then I saw our names. Mine printed neatly, and beneath it, Daniel's signature. His handwriting was unmistakable, the slight lean, the careful loops he always made in his initials. I'd watched him write our Christmas cards every year. I'd watched him sign mortgage paperwork with that same steady hand. But the date was from last week. My breath stumbled, catching on something jagged inside me. I checked again, checked the spelling, checked if maybe this was some kind of mistake or duplicate, or anything else. The house creaked softly behind me as if shifting its weight. The sound threaded a cold line down my spine. Everything looked the same, the porch light still slightly tilted, the clay pot near the steps where Daniel had planted rosemary in the spring. Even the curtains inside the living room sat at the same angle I'd left them in the morning. But now the house felt like it didn't belong to me. Or worse, like it knew something I didn't. I read the notice 3 more times, slower each time, hoping the words might rearrange into something harmless. My hands kept tightening at the edges until the paper creased. No one sells a house without a word. Not a husband, not the man who still kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work, not someone who once held my shaking hands the night my mother passed. Yet his signature stared back at me calm and familiar, as if he'd written it after dinner or before bed, as if this choice had been simple for him. A small voice inside me whispered that maybe I had missed something, a conversation he tried to start, a look he gave me, a silence that wasn't just tiredness. Maybe the signs had been there, quiet and patient like everything else in our home. I stood at the gate for a long time, the paper pressed against my chest, the wind tugging at my hair. The house seemed to watch me not unkindly, but with a strange distance, as if it already knew I no longer belonged to it. The sun slipped behind a cloud, dimming the yard into a softer, colder blue. I didn't step inside right away. I wasn't sure whose door I'd be entering anymore. I first heard them while the kettle was just beginning its low, tired rumble footsteps outside, moving slow as if the yard itself were holding them back. They weren't Daniel's. His steps carried a certain familiar impatience, a rhythm I'd grown used to. These were different. Careful. Curious. Like someone touching a memory that didn't belong to them. Evening laid itself gently across the house, turning every window into a dark mirror. I'd been standing at the counter, trying to lose myself in small routines, rinsing a cup, folding a towel, pretending the notice from the gate didn't still sit on the dining table like a quiet accusation. The house felt unsettled somehow. The walls seemed to listen more closely. The floor kept releasing tiny creaks, as though remembering something it wanted to tell me. Outside, the coastal wind pushed through the pine trees, carrying that faint scent of sea salt and rain-soaked earth. When the footsteps came again, heavier this time, the kettle's soft hiss folded into silence. I felt it before I heard it, that small tightening in the chest that tells you something is wrong long before your mind catches up. I reached for the curtain with slow fingers, the fabric cool between my hands. And when I pulled it back, everything changed shape. 2 people stood in my yard. A man and a woman, strangers, walking the perimeter like inspectors. The woman pointed at the kitchen window. The man leaned his head back, studying the roofline. They moved confidently, as though they'd walked this path many times. A strange heat crawled up my spine. My name was still on the mailbox. My shoes still sat by the door. My life was still inside these walls. And yet these strangers were behaving as if the place had already slipped out of my hands. I stepped outside without thinking, the screen door slapping lightly behind me. "Can I help you?" My voice came out softer than I expected. The couple turned, startled but not apologetic. "Oh," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "We're just looking around. The agent told us the house is already sold." Sold. The word fell like a stone into the space between us. The woman offered a polite smile, the kind strangers give when they believe they have more right to be somewhere than you do. "We just wanted to see how it looks before the final walkthrough." I felt the earth shift under me, a gentle tilt that made it hard to breathe. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. "This is my home." They exchanged a look, a quiet, doubting one, and in that small silence I felt myself unravel just a little. "We were told the transfer went through 2 days ago," the man said. "Your husband handled everything." Daniel's name dropped into the cold air like a match that refused to light. I opened my mouth, searching for a denial that didn't come. 2 days ago. 2 days, and he hadn't said a word. The woman's face softened. "Maybe check with him," she suggested gently, though her tone carried an edge of certainty, as if she believed she already knew the truth. I nodded because it was the only thing I could do. And they left, with a kind of quiet sympathy I didn't want. Their footsteps faded down the gravel path, but their doubt stayed. When they were gone, the yard felt too empty, too exposed. The wind moved through the grass like a warning I couldn't quite understand. I stood there, hands trembling, staring at the place where they'd stood, where strangers had spoken of my home, as though I were only passing through. And for the first time, I wondered, what else had Daniel already taken from me without a word? I used to dust the doorway of Daniel's study without ever stepping inside, like it was a room meant only for the air he breathed. But that night, the handle felt warm under my hand, as if the room had been waiting for me. The light clicked on softly, and the silence inside shifted, not welcoming, not refusing, just aware. The study smelled faintly of cedar and old ink, the way it always did when Daniel spent long evenings balancing numbers I never asked about. His chair sat pushed back an inch from the desk, the way someone leaves it when they think they'll return soon. A sweater hung over it, one I hadn't seen him wear in weeks. I stepped in slowly, my shoes brushing against the woven rug we bought years ago from a roadside stall. The fringe had gathered dust. I remembered him laughing that day, the kind of laugh that came from deep in his chest, warm, easy, unburdened. But the room felt heavier now. Like his belongings were standing up straight, waiting to be inspected or judged. I didn't come looking for secrets, just answers he wouldn't give me. The desk drawer shouldn't have caught my eye, but it did the second one on the left, slightly dented at the corner. I pulled at it lightly. It didn't budge. A small brass lock sat tucked beneath the handle. I checked his keyring, the one he left on the shelf by habit, or maybe by accident. The tiny brass key that used to dangle from the end was missing. A strange chill slid down my spine. Daniel never misplaced things. Not keys, not numbers, not promises. I slid the drawer again, harder this time, as if force might undo whatever he was trying to keep from me. It held firm. So I went through. What I could reach: old receipts folded in fours, tax forms organised in the obsessive handwriting he used for calculations, letters from his late father, paper after paper, nothing about the house. Nothing about us. The silence began to feel alive, humming low against the walls like something breathing beneath the paint. I sank down onto the floor, papers spread around me like fragments of a person I thought I knew. The rug felt rough through my palms. I could hear the faint whir of the refrigerator down the hall, the ticking of the old clock in the living room, normally comforting sounds, but now they made the house feel too large, too hollow. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Daniel sitting here, his fingers tapping the desk, his gaze drifting to the door, almost hoping I wouldn't walk in. Some spaces aren't locked with metal. Some are locked with silence. And for the first time, I realized I didn't know where he kept the pieces of his life he didn't want me to see. I gathered the papers into a loose stack and placed them back on the desk exactly as I'd found them. Not because I feared his anger, but because I feared his absence. Before leaving, I looked once more at the locked drawer, its brass surface catching the dim light like an unblinking eye. It felt like the room was holding its breath. Or maybe I was. Either way, I knew the drawer wasn't the only thing he'd closed to me. By evening, the house felt too still, like it was waiting for me to say something I didn't know yet. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the last light fade behind the trees, turning the glass a soft amber. And in that fading light, every quiet moment between Daniel and me replayed itself. Slow, heavy, like the house was whispering the things I had missed. It's strange how silence becomes louder when you finally start listening. For months, our days had blended together in a gentle, familiar rhythm. Coffee cups left on the table, keys dropped in the bowl, footsteps on the stair at predictable hours. I used to find comfort in that rhythm. But now, thinking back, I see all the places where the rhythm faltered. Daniel's messages had grown shorter. Running late. Don't wait up. Busy today. At the time I believed him. I didn't think I had any reason not to. Careful. Sometimes he'd leave before sunrise, brushing a cold kiss against my forehead. Other nights he'd return after I had already fallen asleep. Always moving. Always tired. I told myself it was stress, work, life. But the truth is, I never asked him why he looked so far away, even when he was standing right beside me. There was one morning, quiet, almost peaceful, when I should have known something was wrong. I was making tea, listening to the familiar whistle of the kettle, when his phone buzzed on the counter. A name I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. Before I could even tilt my head to read it, Daniel reached over and flipped the phone face down. He didn't say a word. He just gave me a smile. Small, strained around the edges. The kind of smile people wear when they're holding something behind their teeth. Work stuff, he said eventually, pouring his coffee as if nothing had happened. But the way his hand trembled slightly, the way he didn't meet my eyes. Those are the details that come back to me now, sharper than they felt then. If I had asked him who it was, what would he have said? Would he have told me the truth? Standing in the kitchen tonight, the cold tile beneath my feet, I replayed that morning again and again. Not the words, there were barely any, but the spaces between them. The pauses, the diverted glances, the conversations he rushed through or avoided entirely. Whenever I mentioned the mortgage or savings, he changed the subject. Whenever I asked how work was going, he would sigh, then steer the conversation toward my day instead. Back then, I thought it was kindness. Now, I wonder if it was fear. Maybe he didn't know how to tell me the truth. Or maybe he thought silence was kinder than confession. The weight of that possibility pressed against my chest, steady and unrelenting. I leaned against the counter, fingers curling around its edge, trying to remember when trust between us had begun to thin so quietly I hadn't heard it tearing. The refrigerator hummed softly, the only sound in the room. I closed my eyes and breathed in the faint scent of lemon dish soap, the same scent that had always meant home. But tonight, it felt different, colder, hollow. I opened my eyes to the empty kitchen doorway, half expecting Daniel to walk through it, smiling that tired smile. But the doorway stayed empty. And as the silence deepened around me, one question rose above all others. What else had he been hiding in all those quiet moments I never questioned? By the time I heard the knock, the morning light was still soft, the kind that makes every corner look half asleep. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel, thinking it was just a courier or a neighbour with a lost letter. But when I opened the door, 3 unfamiliar faces stood on my porch, smiling like people who already owned something they hadn't yet touched. They didn't wait for me to speak. The woman in front crisp blazer, clipped name tag, stepped inside as if my doorway was only a formality. 2 buyers followed her, whispering softly, their eyes moving over every detail, the coat rack, the photos on the wall, the cracks in the paint. Daniel always said he'd fix someday. I didn't understand what was happening, not at first. My brain searched for a reasonable explanation, something simple, something harmless, a mistake in the address, a scheduling error. But the way the woman walked straight down the hallway, heels tapping confidently against the floor, told me this wasn't a mistake. "This is the main corridor," she announced. The buyers smiled, nodding like they'd been waiting for this tour. And I stood there, feeling like the house had shifted a few inches left without warning. "Excuse me," I finally said, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. "What exactly are you doing?" The woman paused, only long enough to glance at her clipboard. "The showing was confirmed this morning," she said. The seller gave verbal approval. Her tone was polite but distant, like she was talking to a stranger at a bus stop. "The seller?" I repeated. My fingers tightened around the dish towel still in my hand. She didn't answer. Instead, she waved the buyers toward the living room. They moved eagerly, stepping around me, slipping plastic covers over their shoes as if protecting something valuable beneath them. I watched them run their hands along the mantel, open cabinets, tap walls with their knuckles as if listening for hollow places. They were already imagining this place without me inside it. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I called Daniel. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Again. And again. The agent led them down the hallway, my hallway pointing out good bones, lots of natural light, easy renovation potential. Her voice thinned out, like it belonged to another reality layered on top of mine. When she pushed open my bedroom door, something inside me flinched. The buyers stepped in, moving slowly, reverently, as if walking through a place already half-claimed. One of them touched the edge of my nightstand. Another looked into my closet, nodding to himself. It was all normal, all part of their process, but it felt like strangers placing their palms on my heartbeat. "This room could be expanded," the agent said. "The seller noted possible plans." I swallowed hard. The seller. My husband. A coldness washed over my back, settling deep like winter air through a cracked window. He hadn't told me. He hadn't told me anything. When the buyers finally left, the house felt bruised, somehow touched too deeply by hands that didn't belong. I stood in the middle of the hallway listening to the faint echo of their footsteps fading down the path. My phone stayed silent. Daniel stayed silent. And the walls around me seemed to breathe in that silence, holding a truth I wasn't ready to face. Why would the man who once vowed to build a life with me start tearing it down without a word? The wind pressed against the windows, carrying the faint smell of salt from the harbour. I was crouched by the edge of the living room rug, stacking books and photo frames into a cardboard box, when my elbow knocked against something wooden. It wobbled, teetered, and then tipped over with a soft thud. The box rolled slightly, revealing a tucked-away envelope yellowed at the edges, resting on the floor as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I picked it up carefully, feeling the rough texture of the paper under my fingertips. My name was scrawled across the front in Daniel's handwriting, hurried, almost jagged. A date in the corner caught my eye. 3 months ago. 3 months. I could almost hear the silence he must have left behind when he set this aside, knowing I wouldn't see it until now. I traced the letters slowly, feeling the familiar tilt of the pen, the weight of the hand that had written words he hadn't spoken aloud. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the sofa, and let the envelope rest in my lap. The house hummed quietly around me. The fridge in the kitchen thrummed in the background. Somewhere upstairs, the floorboards groaned with the settling of night. Everything smelled faintly of old wood and dust. It should have felt like a place of comfort, but instead, it pressed against me with a quiet tension. My fingers lingered on the flap, hesitant. I could open it. I could tear it wide and face whatever secret he had hidden, or I could wait, hold it close, and hope I had the courage to read it later. Finally, I broke the silence. My fingers worked the flap open, careful, almost reverent. The paper inside smelled faintly of ink, the corners creased as if handled many times before. I unfolded it slowly and the words came into focus. They were not angry, not pleading, but quiet, almost afraid. Daniel admitted things I hadn't known, debts, mistakes, choices he had made in solitude. He tried to soften it with explanations, excuses, reasoning that sounded like logic but felt hollow against the walls of our home. My chest tightened as I read, each sentence a whisper of a life he had lived without me, and I realized just how little I had known of him in these 3 months. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had leaned in to watch me, witness my reaction. My hands shook as I set the letter down on the floor, but I couldn't move. I was trapped between the comfort of knowing and the ache of betrayal. Every picture in the room seemed to stare back at me, our smiles frozen in frames, my eyes searching his, the laughter that now felt distant and fragile. I wanted to call him to ask why he had left me in the dark, but my voice wouldn't form. My throat felt clogged with the weight of the envelope and its secret. I pressed the letter to my chest, closing my eyes, and listened. The distant sound of cars passing outside, the occasional creak of the floor, the hum of the house, all of it felt sharper, more alive, more accusatory. I realized that he had tried to protect me in his own way, or perhaps just protect himself, and the result was the same. I was left standing in my own home, facing truths he could not speak aloud. I set the envelope gently on the edge of the sofa, as if it were a fragile bird. My fingers lingered over it, reluctant to let go, but knowing I had to. The night pressed in through the windows, cool and relentless. I breathed slowly, listening to the silence that filled the spaces Daniel had once occupied. And in that quiet, I wondered what I would do with this confession, what I would do with him, and whether the weight of 3 months could ever be lifted from my chest. The envelope stayed on the sofa, still sealed with his words, still heavy, and I stayed on the floor, thinking about what it meant to be left behind by someone you trusted, and how you find yourself when the person you love disappears in shadows you didn't even notice. The envelope trembled in my hands as I pulled the letter free. The paper was thin, slightly crumpled, and smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne, or maybe just the lingering scent of nights he spent alone in the study. I rested it on my knees and unfolded it slowly. The ink had smudged in a few places, the edges worn as if it had been handled over and over during a sleepless night. I could almost hear him pacing the floor, whispering words he would never speak to me directly. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the letter shaking slightly in my hands. Outside, the wind rustled the pine trees, tapping against the window like distant fingers. Inside, the house felt impossibly still, the silence almost accusatory. My eyes traced his words line by line: debts, loans, mismanaged accounts, bills stacked high he hadn't told me about. A year of secrets tucked into corners of our life I thought we shared. I could feel his careful hand trying to soften the blows, cushioning each admission with phrases like, "I tried to protect you," and "I never wanted to disappoint you." The anger rose first, hot, quiet, simmering. How could he think hiding this from me was protecting me? The home we had built together, the walls we had painted, the quiet mornings with coffee and shared plans all now tinged with betrayal. And yet beneath that anger was heartbreak, a dull ache that settled in my chest like cold stones. The way he explained himself, hesitant, almost fragile, made me see the fear that had ruled his decisions. He had feared disappointing me more than he feared losing our home, more than he feared losing us. I pressed my hand over the letter as if I could feel him there, feel what he had felt while writing it. Each line a mixture of truth and half-truths, leaving questions that curled in my mind and refused to settle. Why didn't he tell me sooner? Why keep the silence so meticulously? My chest tightened with every sentence. I wanted to shout, to throw the paper across the room, but my voice was swallowed by the weight of his absence. The house seemed to echo back only the quiet of my breathing. I stood slowly and walked to the study window, staring at the empty driveway, the streetlights casting long shadows over the yard. Where was he now? The thought lingered like smoke curling around everything I had known and trusted. Had he left town already? Was he waiting for me to confront him, or was he hiding somewhere, afraid of my reaction? I could feel his presence in the empty room, in the creak of the floorboards, in the faint smell of the papers he had touched. But the man I wanted to speak to, the one I had married, was gone. I returned to the sofa and folded the letter back into the envelope, my hands still trembling. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the window pane, carrying with it the distant sound of waves from the harbour. I realised I could neither forgive nor confront until I knew where he was, until I could see the truth in his eyes instead of his handwriting. The letter had opened a door to understanding, but it had also closed another, the certainty of our shared life. I set the envelope beside me, staring at it as if it could answer my unspoken questions. The night pressed closer, heavy and unyielding. I listened to the silence of the house, the quiet that had once been comforting, now unfamiliar and sharp. Somewhere in the shadows of our home, the truth lingered, half told and waiting. And I, left alone with it, wondered if I would ever see Daniel again, or if the person who had written these words had already disappeared beyond reach. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past 12, each second louder than the last. The house had settled into a heavy, quiet rhythm, the fridge humming, the wind rattling the shutters, the occasional creak of floorboards like old bones stretching. I was perched on the counter, staring at the shadows that pooled in the corners of the room when my phone buzzed. The screen glowed with a blocked number. I hesitated. It was late. Who would call now? And yet, instinct told me to answer. Hello? My voice was softer than I intended, the kind of soft that barely disturbs the air around you. Shoo, Maya. His voice. I froze. It was Daniel, or something like him, weak, distant, carried as if through static. He sounded far away, though I could hear the edges of strain and guilt woven between his words. I didn't know how to face you. He swallowed, or maybe I imagined it. Things got out of control. I gripped the counter tighter, nails digging into the wood. Where are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to sound calm even as my heart pounded against my ribs. There was a pause, long enough that I thought he hadn't heard me, or maybe he hadn't wanted to answer. I need time to fix things, he said finally. The words were slow, heavy, like each one carried the weight of a life he had been running from. I felt my stomach drop, a hollow emptiness stretching inside me. The way he spoke, the hesitation, the distance, it wasn't just about the house, or the debts, or the secrets. There was something else hiding behind that voice, something bigger, something darker, something he couldn't even name aloud. Daniel, I started, but my throat caught. The word felt fragile, almost too small to carry the weight of all I wanted to say, all I needed to hear. He didn't respond. The line hummed with the sound of his breathing, uneven, ragged, like a man trying to hold himself together through wires and distance. The minutes stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping too loudly in the quiet kitchen, loud enough that I thought he might hear it through the phone. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and pine from the open window, but it didn't comfort me. The house felt foreign, and so did he. He was here somewhere speaking to me, yet entirely absent. Then, abruptly, the line went dead. The sudden silence slammed into me like a door closing too quickly. My hand stayed pressed to the phone, warm and heavy, as if it could somehow pull him back. But there was nothing, only the faint echo of his voice lingering in my ears. I sat down on the floor, leaning against the counter, trying to make sense of it. His words, the hesitation, the call that came too late and ended too soon, they left more questions than answers. Why did he sound like he was hiding from more than just me? From what else was he running? And when he said he needed time, did he mean days, weeks, years? Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, brushing against the windows like a soft warning. Inside, I could feel the space he had left behind, the empty air between us vibrating with secrets I could not reach. I pressed my hands to my face, tasting the salt of tears I hadn't yet allowed myself to shed. When I finally set the phone down, it felt heavier than it had when it rang. The glow of the blocked number faded, leaving only darkness. I breathed slowly, listening to the quiet, trying to find something familiar, but the silence was sharp, unfamiliar, and full of questions that had no immediate answers. And in that dark kitchen, with the shadows pressing close, I realized the truth. Daniel was out there somewhere, speaking but not present, leaving me to wonder not only where he was, but why he felt the need to disappear so completely. I pushed open the bedroom door, the hinges creaking softly like they were surprised to see me. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the late afternoon light slicing through the blinds in long golden lines. I needed to pack a few things, just the essentials, before the buyers or real estate agents came again. It was strange moving through the space that had once been ours, feeling the weight of absence in every corner. I opened the closet slowly, expecting the usual order. Shirts folded neatly, shoes lined up like soldiers, his watch boxes on the top shelf. But the shelves were empty. His clothes, his shoes, even the small leather box holding his watch were all gone. My chest tightened as the realization settled in, slow and deliberate. He hadn't sold the house to protect us. He had sold it to leave. My knees felt weak. I leaned on the doorframe, trying to hold on to a sense of balance, but the floor tilted beneath me, the room spinning just slightly, like the walls themselves were withdrawing their support. I ran my fingers along the empty shelves, fingertips brushing against dust where his things had been. Each absence spoke louder than words could, the soft echoes of mornings we'd shared, the quiet evenings, the small rituals all gone. And yet, amid the emptiness, something remained. There it was at the back of the closet, my wedding dress, hanging in its white garment bag, untouched. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the fabric, making it glow softly against the empty backdrop of shelves. I blinked and stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. It looked almost sacred, suspended in stillness, waiting. I reached out and touched the bag, my fingers trembling as they pressed against the soft folds of silk beneath. I sank to the floor, letting the dress fall across my lap. Its weight was light, but the emotions it carried were heavy years of hope, of promises, of dreams I thought we had shared. My hands traced the outline of the bag, wondering if he had left it deliberately, a message or a memory, or if he had simply forgotten it in his hurry to vanish. Was it meant to be a goodbye, a silent acknowledgement of what he had chosen to abandon? Or was it a reminder of what I had lost, left behind like a ghost in an empty room? The quiet in the house pressed against me, thick and almost suffocating. Outside, the wind rattled the blinds, carrying the faint smell of autumn leaves and salt from the harbour. The room felt suspended in time, the floorboards whispering beneath me, as if remembering all the steps he had taken, her steps that were no longer his. I hugged the dress closer, feeling the fabric against my face, tasting the salt of tears I didn't realize I had been holding back. I leaned back against the wall, eyes tracing the contours of the empty closet, the void where his life had been packed and removed. The silence was punctuated only by the slow tick of the bedroom clock, a metronome marking the rhythm of absence. I felt hollow yet strangely alive, the raw ache of betrayal tempered by the softness of the silk in my hands. For a long time I just sat there, watching the sunlight fade and listening to the quiet. The dress remained pristine, untouched, suspended in a space where memories lingered like dust motes in the air. And I realized that in its presence, I had something to hold onto, even if everything else was gone. I didn't move for what felt like hours, just breathing, just feeling the weight of what remained and what had disappeared. And when I finally stood, the dress still in my arms, I whispered to the empty room, to the absent man who had left it behind. Was this for me? Or for him? The sunlight was pale that morning, spilling through the blinds in thin, slanted stripes. Dust floated in the air, caught in the light like tiny ghosts. I moved slowly from room to room, bare feet pressing against the wooden floors, the grain rough under my toes. Each step felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. I wanted to remember this house, every corner, every shadow, before it became someone else's. I traced my fingers along the walls, lingering where Daniel and I had painted together years ago. The brush strokes were uneven, slightly jagged in places, but perfect in memory. I could feel the echo of our laughter, the way he had teased me for choosing the wrong shade of yellow, the way I had pressed paint between my fingers just to annoy him. Even the quiet arguments over furniture, over curtains, over the smallest choices, they were alive in the walls, if I listened closely enough. In the kitchen, I ran my hand over the counter, cold and smooth beneath my fingertips. I remembered mornings with coffee steam curling between us, the low hum of conversation, his hand brushing mine as I reached for a cup. The house felt full not of objects, but of the invisible threads of memory. The living room held the echo of late-night movies and whispered secrets. The bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and linen, carrying the ghosts of folded clothes, of whispered apologies, of soft promises made in the dark. I moved from room to room, gathering what I could carry, small boxes of books, framed photographs, pieces of fabric, letters tucked into drawers. My arms ached, but my heart carried a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. It surprised me, the way my body moved with purpose, even as my chest ached from the weight of absence. The house hadn't been taken from me suddenly. It had begun slipping away long before the papers were signed, long before the notices appeared on the gate. I had only realized it too late when the walls started to feel strange and unfamiliar beneath my hands. I paused in the hallway, the floorboards creaking like they remembered every step I had ever taken. I ran my fingers along the banister, tracing the familiar grooves, the dents and scratches that marked years of life lived here. Each mark told a story: spilled wine on the floor, a dropped vase, a scuff from running too quickly down the stairs. I could almost hear the echoes of Daniel's voice, distant and soft, and I wondered if he remembered them too, or if he had erased them along with his presence. The bedroom was last. I folded my wedding dress carefully, placing it in the back of a box. Its silk was cool against my fingers, heavy with memory. I pressed it against my chest, breathing slowly, letting the past wash over me. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closer, as if the house itself were grieving its own emptiness. I took one final walk through every room, letting my hands brush over door frames, shelves, counters. I closed cabinets, touched windows, and ran my fingers along the baseboards. The house was still full of echoes, full of life that no stranger could erase, and yet it was time to leave. I stepped to the front door, box in hand, and looked back through the glass. The sunlight caught the dust in the air, turning it into a soft golden haze. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the house in my chest and the quiet ache of endings. My hand lingered on the doorknob, warm and worn from years of turning it. And as I opened the door and stepped outside, I realized the question that had been waiting for me all along. What will my life look like once I step beyond this threshold for the last time? The wind from the street brushed my face, carrying the faint scent of salt and leaves. The house stood behind me, still full of echoes, still alive in ways only I could hear. And I, finally, began to walk forward. The morning air hit me sharp and salty as I stepped outside, brushing against my cheeks like tiny needles. The wind off the coast had a bite I hadn't remembered, cold enough to make me pull my jacket tighter around me. I lingered by the gate, the same gate where I had first seen the notice pinned with that official stamp, fluttering in the wind. My fingers traced the rough wood absent-mindedly, worn smooth by years of leaning, pushing, and opening. I looked back at the house, and for a moment I felt nothing but anger. Only a quiet, painful acceptance, like the echo of a song I knew by heart, but couldn't sing anymore. I carried the wedding dress carefully to the car, the white garment bag soft and heavy in my hands. Every fold of silk felt like memory, our laughter. The mornings when Daniel had brushed paint onto my nose just to make me laugh, our whispered plans that now seemed fragile and far away. I slipped it into the back seat, unsure whether it would stay there, whether I would keep it, sell it, or burn it. The uncertainty of it, the weight of what it carried, made my hands shake just slightly as I closed the door. I sat in the driver's seat and paused, gripping the wheel, listening. The coastal wind rattled the side mirrors, seagulls called in the distance, and the faint hum of the engine idled beneath my hands. The house behind me seemed smaller now, quiet in a way that made it almost unreal. It had held a lifetime of moments, but I realized the house itself had not left me. It had simply given me space to go. The memories were mine, even if the walls would belong to someone else tomorrow. I started the car, the tires crunching over gravel, and glanced in the rearview mirror. The gate, the fence, the pale yellow walls all blurred slightly as I drove slowly away. My chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The ache of betrayal and confusion softening into something unfamiliar. Calm. A calm that came not from forgetting, not from forgiving, but from the simple act of moving forward. I had held on to the past tightly, and now I was releasing it, piece by piece, mile by mile. The road stretched ahead, winding along the coastline, the salt-tinged breeze brushing through the open window. I breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the distant promise of something new. The engine hummed steadily, a steady rhythm beneath my thoughts. I watched the horizon, the sun low and pale, casting long shadows across the land. It felt like a border between what had been and what could be. I thought of Daniel, of the letters, of the quiet confessions, of the absence that had grown louder than any presence. I thought of the dress in the back seat, the house behind me, the memories that still lingered. And I understood that leaving was not just about leaving him, or the house, or the life we had built. It was about stepping into a space where I could begin again, uncertain and raw, but entirely my own. The tyres rolled over the asphalt, and the coastline stretched wider, endless and open. The wind tugged at my hair, whispered against my cheeks, and carried the faint cries of gulls overhead. The house, the gate, the letters, the dress, they were all behind me now, tucked into the folds of memory I would carry carefully. And as the road unwound ahead, a strange peace settled into my chest, soft and deliberate. The storm of confusion, anger, and heartbreak had passed. The air was clear, the horizon wide, and the future, though uncertain, was waiting. I pressed my foot gently on the gas, letting the car glide forward. Beyond the gate, beyond the past, beyond the silence, something entirely new waited for me. If her story touched you, if her truth made you pause, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Her Truth Matters and hear the voices that often go unheard. Every story, every secret, every quiet heartbreak, it matters. Stay with us, because her truth deserves to be told.